U.S. Congress and companies react to Trump's response to riots.
This is Reuters Now.
Joseph R. Biden, Jr. of the state of Delaware has received 300...
Just hours after hundreds of supporters of President Donald Trump stormed the U.S. Capitol, a shaken Congress has now certified Democrat Joe Biden's election victory. And the White House has released a statement in which Trump pledges an orderly transition when Biden is sworn in, although the statement also repeats the false claim that Trump won.
Does a gentleman from Pennsylvania...
Floor debate in Congress resumed, stretching into the early hours on Thursday after police secured the building. Both the House and Senate overwhelmingly rejected two objections to the vote tally for Arizona and Pennsylvania, certified that Biden received 306 votes to Trump's 232. 4 people are now known to have died during the chaos, according to police. 1 from gunshot wounds and 3 from medical emergencies. 52 people were arrested at the time. The outcome of this vote tally was never in doubt, but those who stormed the Capitol did force their way through security barricades, shattered windows, and scaled walls to fight their way in. Some besieged the chamber holding the floor of the House of Representatives while lawmakers were still inside, forcing suspension of the debate. Security officers barricaded the door with furniture before helping lawmakers escape. Vice President Mike Pence, who'd already angered Trump by resisting his calls to intervene in the vote, called it a dark day in U.S. history when he reconvened the session.
To those who wreaked havoc in our Capitol today, you did not win. Violence never wins. Freedom wins. And this is still the people's house.
Several Republicans who'd previously supported Trump's claims of widespread voter fraud and were expected to mount objections to the vote tally changed their minds by the time they had returned the chamber and also urged their fellow lawmakers to certify Biden's victory. Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler was one of them after losing her re-election campaign in Georgia less than 24 hours earlier. That state has flipped the balance of power in Senate to the Democrats.
The violence, the lawlessness, and siege of the halls of Congress are abhorrent and stand as a direct attack on the very institution my objection was intended to protect.
Trump, who'd refused to concede to Biden, had urged his supporters on Wednesday morning to march in the Capitol and, quote, fight. His legal challenges to Biden's victory have been rejected by courts across the country.
After mobs of pro-Trump protesters stormed the U.S. Capitol, outrage against the U.S. president grew from both lawmakers and big-name American companies on Wednesday. Republican House lawmaker and daughter to a former vice president, Liz Cheney, tweeted, "There is no question that the president formed the mob. The president incited the mob. The president addressed the mob. He lit the flame." In a statement, former Republican President George W. Bush called the events in the U.S. Capitol an insurrection and blamed political leaders for undermining democracy since the November election. Twitter suspended President Trump's Twitter account for 12 hours on Wednesday and warned he could be permanently kicked off for violations of the platform's rules. Democratic Congresswoman Ilhan Omar said she was drawing up articles of impeachment after Trump's urging to fight his election loss. Even though there are 2 weeks left before Trump leaves office, Omar tweeted that, quote, "We can't allow him to remain in office. It's a matter of preserving our republic, and we need to fulfill our oath." Meanwhile, the head of a major business group that represents thousands of companies, from Pfizer to ExxonMobil, urged top U.S. officials to consider removing Trump from office. National Association of Manufacturers president and CEO Jay Timmons said Trump incited violence in an attempt to retain power, and that, quote, "Vice President Pence, who was evacuated from the Capitol, should seriously consider working with the cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment to preserve democracy."
You're up to date. Check back later as stories develop.
From CNN News Briefing at 2:46 a.m. today.
Good morning. This is your CNN News Briefing for Thursday, January 7th. Congress has affirmed President-elect Joe Biden's victory over President Trump in the 2020 election. Vermont's 3 electoral votes put Mr. Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris over the 270 threshold. President Trump has pledged an orderly transition of power to Mr. Biden, saying, "Even though I totally disagree with the outcome, there will be an orderly transition on January 20th. One person was shot and dozens are injured after rioters stormed the halls of Congress in Washington, D.C. to block President-elect